Hey, good morning, y'all. I was thinking about the competition between the needs of the group and the needs of the individual. Like, a lot of my thinking about the way that conflict occurs between people comes back to the idea that there is an inherent difference in the assumptions that most of us make about what is more important, the group or the individual. And to a lesser extent, although not an irrelevant one, the definition of the group. In my most attempted progressive frames of mind, I try and define the perimeter of the groups as the perimeter of my skin. Like, there's me, the collection of cells and neurons and bacteria and whatever micro or macro organism I might be. There's the perimeter of my skin. And then there's the perimeter of humanity. I try not to define things at the group level of, say, Americans or men or Democrats or white people. There's basically people and there's person. There's a lot of conversation that we can have about the validity or value of that style of definition. Like, one of the biggest problems that I see with it is, like, where does that leave the rest of the natural world? But I feel like that's a different conversation, and while it's one that's worth having, it's not the one that I'm thinking about right now. What I'm thinking about right now is that, like, if I do define things that way, like, I am clearly at minimum accepting that there are two tiers of value. There's my own interests, and the interests of humanity, of which I'm a member, but I'm certainly not the only one, best of my ability to tell. So I'm not at present an absolutist in the sense that, like, what is important to me is the only thing that's important and the needs of the group are completely irrelevant, nor am I at the other extreme where I'm like, my needs as an individual are meaningless in the greater context of the group. I think I do have a sense of some kind of prioritization. In some respects, I'm willing to sacrifice personal interests on behalf of the group because there is an ethical value that I associate with that. But then there's also this preservation competition where my capacity to continue to sacrifice on the behalf of the greater group is in some ways predicated on my ongoing existence. So sometimes I'll do something on my own behalf at a survival level, literally, or at a survival level metaphorically, in service of continuing to persist in my existence. The theory being that, like, while I have taken from the group as a whole in this individual decision, I'm giving to the group in the whole by continuing to be a person who's trying to do good and right things. But there is an inherent competition, which is the thrust of what I'm thinking about this morning, and I'm wondering how irreconcilable it might be. Like, it doesn't take a lot of thinking to come up with examples of scenarios where the outcomes for the individual in sacrificing for the group are so prejudicial as to be, considered on their own completely unacceptable. Like any scenario in which the individual dies, fails to continue to exist on behalf of the larger group, whether that's in a intentional choice derived way, like often we think about this in the context of like soldiers who sacrifice themselves on behalf of the country. But also there's the non-choice derived way where like, the needs of the society are such that for one reason or another, not all of the individuals that comprise the society can survive, like, famine, certain war scenarios, etc. There can be if we try to keep everybody alive, we all die, versus if we permit, some portion of people to expire, then the rest of us can go on. That sort of calculus, setting aside for the moment who is privileged to make that choice. And, notwithstanding these individual examples of scenarios where this competition between the needs of the individual and the needs of the group are on display, I'm curious at a more abstracted and holistic level whether that is like a definitional problem, like a PNP, P not NP kind of situation where like there's fundamentally never a scenario where those can be reconciled, not along any timeline, not in any context. Like, is there, in the attempt to balance through my own expression of ethic the needs of the many versus the needs of the individual, am I inherently exhibiting a logical shortcoming, a failure of vision, or a inefficiency or an ambiguity that undermines either of my intentions? Like, am I doing that thing where by trying to have my cake and eat it too, I lose my cake and I lose the ability to eat? I don't, of course, think that this is a fundamentally answerable question. Not that it doesn't deserve the exploration associated with attempting to answer it. And I, of course I could be wrong. It could be answerable in some way that I don't have the vision for right now. But yeah, like I'm very interested in my own success as an organism. I want to thrive. I want to develop and achieve goals that are meaningful to me. I want portions of the various different kinds of happiness. A friend recently defined those as like hedonistic happiness, safety happiness, and fulfillment happiness. And that's adequate for right now. I don't know that I fully understand what happiness is, but all of the things in those three categories are things that I am interested in having for myself. And I am inherently, in every interaction and every choice, balancing those against the needs of the group. Like in my relationship with my partner, in my relationship with my neighborhood, in my relationship with the people that I work with and have worked with in the past, there is give and take on the prioritization of those things in many, many mundane ways, in addition to the more mission critical ones. Like sometimes it's about who gets the oxygen, and sometimes it's about who gets to speak next. There's scale here. But I don't, like, when I think about the things that I don't know. And I think about the things that I don't know a lot. This idea of what are the inputs that would inform my understanding of this balance, and what do I choose to do with those inputs? This is another example of the just perfectly infinite number of things where I have to make a decision. The act of not making a decision is a decision, and in making my decision, will fundamentally not have all of the information. And after having made my decision, I will fundamentally never know to what extent the decision that I made impacted the outcomes. Like the vast number of unknown unknowns. But yeah, that was what was on my mind today, dear reader. What are your thoughts on the fundamental irreconcilability, if it exists, if it is fundamentally irreconcilable, the needs of the individual versus the needs of the group, however you define the group, whether it's your marriage, your family, your neighborhood, your work, your church, your chess club. For me, that perimeter, I try, in the context of my own ethic, I try to make it as broad as possible. The two perimeters are me and all of humanity. But however you define that perimeter of yourself versus the group, which of those two you're trying to balance between, presuming you're trying to balance. Is that foolish? Is that possible? Is that meaningful? Is this a intractable problem? Let me know what you think.